speaker with us today, Mr. Walter Ziffer, and I'll say more about him in just a second. Mr. Ziffer is a Holocaust survivor, and those of you that went on the 7th and 8th grade trip, we went to the Holocaust Museum, so this kind of makes it a little more real when you hear his story today. But I want to just encourage you to show him what good students we have here at Madison Middle. I know a lot of you haven't seen your friends over the break, and you're excited to be sitting by them this morning, but please tune in to what he's saying and not tuning into what somebody besides you's doing. Let's show him what a group of respectful students we've got, which you all are, and do an awesome job. And let's show him that today. But again, we are excited to have Mr. Ziffer here. His wife is visiting also. She's down in the library right now looking around. But Mr. Ziffer, as we know, survived the Holocaust, and he'll talk about that story. And he, I think, lived through 7 different camps. And he may talk a little more about that, but just really a neat story. And the sad part is, a lot of Holocaust survivors are aging out and not able to share their stories or anything like that. So we're really considered an honor for you to be here with us today at Madison Middle. So thank you for being here.
Someone here could repeat the question to me. We can do that. Okay?
He said at the end there'll be a short time for questions and answers. So, as he tells the story, if you think of questions, just say those to me. I want to thank Ms. Rector and Ms. Metcalf for making this happen today. Some of our teachers went to a workshop and heard Mr. Ziffer and thought it would be awesome if we could get him to come to our school, so that's how that happened. So, Mr. Ziffer, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. This thing works.
Yes.
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I want to express my thanks to Ms. Rector and Ms. Metcalf, who are responsible for inviting me here. And it's a pleasure meeting you, and I'm wishing you a good morning, a cold good morning. I think it was in the middle 20s in Weaverville, where my wife Gail and I live. And it's a pleasure to be at Madison Middle School. Never been here before. If I'm here, I want to tell you right now, it's just maybe not a small but a big miracle, because most of the young people whom I knew in my town and who began going through the same problems as I did, and I'll tell you more about that, of course, are dead because they were murdered at one point or another in one of the camps. And I was very, very fortunate to survive. And had it not happened that way, I wouldn't be here among you this morning, obviously. So I'm very grateful to be here in Madison, at Madison Middle School, to be able to share this with you. I will tell you more toward the end about my liberation from the last camp, last one of 7 different camps, the 7th one. And do remember certain things that puzzle you maybe while I'm speaking, so that you may ask questions afterwards, and I'll try my best to respond to these, of course. So, I'm over 90 years old now, and so I don't know how long I'll be around, probably not terribly long. And so I find it particularly important, and I find it a particular privilege to be with you, because as your principal mentioned to you, people who've been in the Holocaust just are disappearing very quickly now. We're just getting very old, and there aren't many days or months or years left to share the story. I did recently write a book, and we actually have it here, and we can share this with you and sell it to you if you're interested, in which my story is recorded in greater detail than I can give you in this encounter with you guys. So, I've heard other Holocaust speakers talk about their experiences, of course. Not very many, but maybe half a dozen or so, on and off over the years. And they usually begin the story by saying that, they had a good life. Everything went just fine with them and their families. And then one day they woke up and the whole situation had changed. And suddenly they were in a situation totally different from the previous one and much worse, of course. And I think that's very true. It's a true report. And something very similar happened to us, except that prior to that one day when you wake up and you find that everything has changed, things happened before that led up to that moment. You don't go from one day in good life to the next day that's pure hell. And so I want to say just a few things about that. Have you, in your studies, I mean, those of you who were at the Holocaust Museum, I didn't know that some of you were there. Did you run into the word anti-Semitism? If you have, would you raise your hand, your arm? Okay, so, well, maybe a third of you have. Anti-Semitism is an old phenomenon. It goes back probably 19 or 20 centuries, actually, and it's a hate of Judaism and Jewishness and Jews. Everything that touches upon Jews is no good, and it's downgraded and it's hated. So I'm a Jewish person, of course. I was born to Jewish mother, to a father and mother were Jewish. I want to ask you something now. Did you have any choice in choosing your parents? No. Did you have any choice in choosing your parents' religion? No. Well, I didn't either. When you're born, right? And you're born to certain parents who brought you into the world. And what follows is, in some ways, predetermined here. And when you happen to be born in a group that's usually identified as a minority group, whether these are African Americans, or whether they're Hindus, or whether they're Buddhists, or whether they're Jews, or whether they're Christians. Christians are in America are not a minority, of course. You had nothing to do with it. And usually, if you are a Christian, you're a Christian because you have Christian parents. And if you're a Jew, you're a Jew because of Jewish parents. Do you agree with me? Okay. So we have that out of the way, and you understand that. I'm very proud of you to have understood it. So here's what happened. For the last 20 centuries, this minority of Jewish people have been persecuted in one way or another. And hundreds of thousands have been killed in these persecutions. And the last persecution, of course, that I'm talking about now is the Holocaust. Those of you who were at the museum, who was at the museum, by the way? Oh my gosh, wonderful, fantastic. So you know a lot about this, okay? Which is very helpful to me, because I don't have to explain things to you. You've seen the pictures and the exhibits and what have you. So it's been around. We can talk about it more if you have questions about it. Be happy to try to elaborate on this. So what happens, I'm originally from Czechoslovakia. It's a country that no longer exists in the sense that it was divided up, or that they divided it themselves. Czechoslovakia. So the Czechs wanted to be separate from a certain moment on, and the Slovaks also. So we have now two countries, that which was previously Czechoslovakia. So I'm from there. I'm from a province which is called Moravia, which was in the middle. Czechoslovakia is in Central Europe. It's a sort of a longish thing, and in the middle is Moravia. And we live on the border with Poland, which was north of us. So to make a long story short, I grew up there. I was born there. I grew up there, and I went to school there. And so my native language is both Czech and German, and also I speak Polish and a few other languages. But that's what, that's so basic. That's what I grew up with. And so I went to Czech school, but we spoke German at home. Well, let me tell you something about early anti-Semitism before the Holocaust, okay? I had a good friend who was also a Jewish young fellow. I was about 8 years old. That's what I'm going to talk to you about, 8 years old. And we used to walk from school back home together. We lived about 3 or 4 blocks from each other. His father, Jacob was his name. Jacob's father was a tailor. And so we were walking home, and smack in the middle of our town, there are railroad lines. And to get from one side of the railroad to the other side, you have to go down steps, and then you go through a little tunnel underneath, and then you go up, and you're on the other side. You get it? Simple enough. So Jacob and I walked home once, and as we went down into the dark part, the tunnel part, suddenly rocks were thrown at us from the other side where we walked, and these were kids. They were screaming at us, Žid, Židek, Špinavi Židek. Now, I know you guys don't know Czech, but in Czech and in Russian and in Poland, all these are Slavic languages. They sort of belong to each other. That means Jew, filthy little Jew. That's what it meant. And the rocks were coming at us. And so Jacob and I started running, and we saved ourselves. I ran one direction, in the other. I went in the apartment house that had a glass door, so I looked out and see what was happening to the other guy. They didn't pay attention to me. They just followed him. And sure enough, just shortly before they got him, we had what was called the stupid one in our town. It was an elderly man who was physically and mentally challenged and who cleaned up the streets, the droppings from the horses and the things that were being thrown away, etc., etc. And he had a two-wheeled cart. And so he came running with his two-wheeled cart and picked up Jacob just before the kids caught him and would have beaten him up in all probability. I put him on the cart and galloped away with him and deposited Jacob in front of his house. Now, this is just a simple story. But the question that I'm asking myself and that I want you to ask yourselves is why? Why did they throw this stone at us? Why did they call us filthy Jew or filthy little Jew? And why did they run after him? And if they had caught him, they would have beat him up because that happened before. So I know. Why? Where did 8-year-old kids learn to hate other kids? That's the question I want to ask you. And that's the question I want you to take home with you and to talk about, okay? Or to talk about in class. Well, they could have heard it only from either the parents or the teachers or the preachers in church. I don't know. Where else? Do you have any ideas? No. So, you see, that's the miserable part about anti-Semitism. People even don't know why they hate, but they hate. And they put other people down. And I'm sure, I hope, this sort of thing doesn't happen in this school or in other schools in our area or all over America. Because this is stupid, and it's dangerous, and it shouldn't happen. So, just to show you that anti-Semitism, this hatred of Jews, goes back. Even before Hitler came on the scene in Germany, before the Holocaust happened, anti-Semitism existed, and because of the hatred, tens of thousands of people died. During the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish people were killed. So, gives you an idea, 6 million, hello? That's 100 times the whole population of Asheville. Give you an idea, okay? So how did this whole thing now happen with me in my life? On September 1st, Czechoslovakia and Poland were invaded by German troops. 1st of September was the outbreak of World War II, okay? And I remember standing at the window with my sister. I had a sister whose name is Edith. She no longer is with us, unfortunately, as my parents, of course, aren't either. We stood at the window looking out, and we saw the Czech and then Polish army running away, fleeing. Well, they were fleeing because the German army was coming in. It was chaotic. It was totally chaotic. So that took for about 1 hour, this retreat of the Polish and the Czech army. And then for about half an hour, it was nothing. And then came the German army. And they came in perfect order. They came in personnel carriers, on motorcycles, in trucks, you name it, some were marching. And they were marching in. And we had bridges, and we lived close to one of the bridges that went into Poland because we were on the border of Poland. And so this whole army, German army, just came through our town, through Main Street, over the bridge and into Poland. We watched that, okay? Really didn't know exactly what was going on. But it was scary. Many of my family had already fled. They were no longer in town. My father thought that we could stay in town. He was an optimist, and so we were there. And then there was silence again for a while, and then came the SS. Now, those of you who were at the museum in Washington know what the SS were. This was a paramilitary organization, black uniforms, black boots, black hats, and they came and they were the occupation troops now. They settled in our town, and now we were under the rule of Nazi Germany, okay? Hitler's Germany. And that's when our misery began, okay? So how did it begin? Within 1 week, we Jewish people, had to wear white armbands, and you can actually see me, if you Google my name, you'll see a picture of me and a friend of mine who died in the Holocaust with a white armband on, with a blue six-pointed star here, which is a symbol of Judaism. So we were identified. That's why I'm trying to tell you. We were identified as Jewish people. So why is that so terrible? Well, it's terrible because, for instance, my mom would try to find food, to buy food for us, to feed us, would go to the market. But the people didn't want to be seen with Jewish people. Well, I had a white armband. My mom had a white armband, Jewish. So there were very few farmers who came to town who wanted to be seen or to sell to Jewish people. My mom was very popular in our town, and so she had friends among the farmers, and these friends would give her food. So we never went hungry. That's one good thing, of course. The next thing was that we were evicted from our apartment. We didn't have a house. There were very few people in our town that owned homes. Those were the rich people. We were not rich. We were, average people. And so we lived in an apartment on the second floor, very nice. But when you became evicted by the Nazis, by the Germans, hey, you left with 2 suitcases per person, and everything else that you had accumulated. And parents and young people too have a way of accumulating things, gifts and stuff, things that you buy, that you like. All that remained in the apartment, and we had to walk out each with about 2 suitcases. We were lucky. Before the war, we had a lady who lived actually in our apartment. She was a Hungarian lady. His name was Malci Kurjanova, and she cooked with my mom. She was a maid, you might say, but we loved her almost as much as our mom. And so we were able to give her a few things, like a few oil paintings, 1 or 2 rugs, Persian rugs, to keep, to save for us. And she did, and she returned everything to us after the war when we came back having survived. So we lost just about everything. My father had a library of about 2,000 books. He was an attorney, a lawyer, and all that stayed there, everything. Out we were, okay? So
Much for that.
the identification was changed then. Another 2-3 weeks later, I can't give you the exact dates, obviously, we were no longer forced to wear armbands, but we had a yellow star that was sewn on the front of our jackets or shirts or whatever we wore outside. And in the yellow star was the word written Jude, which in German means Jew. So we were identified again, okay? But differently, that's about all. But let me give you an example of the harassment that we went through before we went into the camps. So for instance, it was fall when the Nazis had come in, it was September. Well, the leaves fall from the trees pretty soon, and we had very nice parks in our town. By the way, I visited there in 2009 and spoke there, so I could see again the beauty of the place. So, okay, you have to rake leaves. So we were taken off the street by policemen, German policemen, and taken to these parks and given the rakes and rake these leaves. We want to get rid of them. So what do you do? Have you ever raked leaves? Anybody? Yeah, so you know what it's all about. And you put them into piles, right? And then you set fire to them and you get rid of them. It turns into ashes. Well, what happened in our case is that we had to put them into piles, and then the policemen, the German policemen, came and set fire to this, and we had to run through the walkways of the park and even sing songs that everybody knew, and then jump over these piles that were burning. And so the older folks that were forced to do that every so often fell into those burning leaves and caught fire themselves. We younger people precipitated ourselves on these people trying to put out the fires on them. Well, that was bad enough, but what was even worse is then people stood around us, people of our town, and just laughed their heads off. How funny that was, that all these people had fallen in and caught fire and we running, you know, and trying to extinguish that. So this is called sadism. These very sadistic people who enjoy other people's suffering. Now, one thing that I haven't told you yet, and I have to backtrack just a little bit, is that on the 1st of September, when the Nazis came in, well, we didn't just exactly know what to expect, of course, but that night, as I said, I was about, how old was I? That was 1939, I was 12 years old. That morning, into the 2nd of September, I couldn't sleep. There was something that kept me from sleeping. I was scared, and so I went in search of my dad. My dad and I were like this. We loved each other. My father was my educator. He was a wonderful dad. And so I looked into the bedroom first, where my father always lay next to my mom, and he wasn't there. And so I looked, you know, went into the apartment, looking around, and I found him on a balcony in the back of our apartment, 2nd floor. And he was standing there, and he was white as a sheet. And I said, Daddy, what's going on? And my dad said to me, listen, Walter. And so I listened. And I heard these weird sounds, like things breaking, or things being broken, glass being shattered, people whistling, people singing, crashes like sounds and things that just falling down. And I said to my dad, Daddy, what's going on? And there were also ashes in the air that were sort of settling down on us. And my dad said, Walter, I think they are burning our synagogue. What's a synagogue? Who knows what a synagogue is? So not too many of you. Well, okay. A synagogue is basically a place where Jewish people worship. It's the exactly same thing as a church, except for Jewish people who go there. Old Testament is different from New Testament. We don't have a New Testament in our Bibles. We have an Old Testament. Then the other writings that we read and study. So anyway, my father was the last president of this congregation, of our Jewish congregation. So my father says, I think they're burning our synagogue. My father was very well known in town. As I say, he was a lawyer. People would take off their hats on Sunday morning when we walked with him out into nature a little bit and say, good morning, Dr. Ziffer. He never knew who it was. We asked him, Daddy, who is this that, just greeted us? He used to say, if God doesn't know him better than I, then he's in trouble. So, anyway, he was well known. And so we walked the next morning over there to see what had happened. And sure enough, my father had been right. The synagogue was burned. Only a few walls stood. All the stained glass windows were out. They were just scattered, just broken in the street. In a synagogue, there are biblical scrolls that are really the center of the worship place, that go from Genesis to Deuteronomy, first 5 books of the Bible. All that was ruined. Some of it stolen. And so we were standing there. And as I said, I was 12 years old. I didn't really understand what was going on. So a building had burned down. That happened before. I wasn't terribly impressed. But I'll tell you what did impress me. What did impress me was that the people who stood there with us and who walked by, none of them, without one exception, knew my father anymore. Didn't say hello to us. So I'm trying to tell you here what happens on a human level when you're identified as an outlaw, basically. That you cannot appeal to anyone for the treatment that you're getting. There's no one to appeal to because you've become an outlaw overnight, practically. And so that did shock me, that suddenly nobody knew my dad anymore. Well, that was to continue. I mean, nobody would, until we were deported, knew my dad. So one other thing two other things that hang sort of together that I want to share with you. We were evicted 4 times. Every time we went into a smaller place with many more people in those places, in those apartments. But we were still in our town, and my mom still bought the groceries and etc. And we didn't go hungry or anything like that. We were sort of persecuted, but we could take all that. But then at one point, we ended up in a ghetto. Now what's a ghetto? All the Jewish people were herded into one particular place on the periphery of our town. And that town was an abandoned entertainment complex. There were ballrooms there where people used to dance. There were 2 restaurants there that no longer functioned. It was a big place. And the halls, the dance halls, were maybe 4 times as big as this room. And the people who were squeezed into that would run wires from one side to the other at right angles, this way and that way, forming compartments. And then on the wires, they put sheets or other textiles, fabric, to have some privacy. And so each family ended up having a space of, say, 12 by 12 in those halls. So that was the ghetto. And there were roads around it that were patrolled by German policemen. Sounds pretty bad, and it was bad. But at that particular time, I had really a great time. I was happy, and guess why? Because I got to know a little girl who was about 1 year older than I, who was absolutely gorgeous, blonde hair, gold blonde hair. I fell in love with her, she liked me, and we played ping pong on improvised pieces of wood, you know, and both of us were very happy. Well, when you're in love, you're always happy, right? No answer? Okay, I understand. So, in order to prevent being deported, being thrown out of town, and being sent into a camp, there was one possibility to delay that. And delaying it meant working in a factory that supported Hitler's war efforts, because Hitler was, of course, in the middle of a war, okay? And so my father, who was the head of the congregation, made it possible for young people, about 45, 50 of us, to work in a bolt and nut factory, okay? But we had to get there by train. And it took about 45 minutes by train to get there. And so Lydia, that was the girl I was in love with, and I, holding hands, we would walk down to the train station, we'd get on the train, we'd sit on the train, holding hands. It was night shift. At midnight, we had a snack together. Well, it was a great time. You know, I mean, that was my first time that I really loved the little girl. So, it was great. And then one day, Lydia came to the stage of one of these dance halls. My family lived on the stage of the dance hall with a family to the right side and family to the left side. And she said, Walter, I have bad news. And I said, so what is it? Well, my parents decided to get out of this ghetto, to flee, and we're going to march or take rides, get rides, to go east toward Russia, because Russia was still a safe haven for the Jewish people at that time. And so we are going to leave. We both started weeping, crying, and we embraced, and we kissed. And Lydia had a gold chain, a necklace, and she had a pendant on that necklace, and I have a little copy of that a teacher many years ago found it at a flea market. If you want to see it afterwards, I'll be glad to show it to you. It's a little pendant where you twirl a little disc, and when you twirl the disc, it spells out to you, I love you. And she said to me, keep the pendant, and whenever you do that, you'll remember me. Oh, we'll be back in 2-3 weeks, and we'll continue our friendship. Well, we said goodbye to each other, and she left. About 10 days later, someone came to my dad and told me, I have bad news for you, Dr. Ziffer. What is it? Well, we found the Ringel family, parents and daughter Lydia, shot dead, 10 miles east of town. And what had happened is they did leave, they tried to flee, but they were intercepted by a German patrol, and they were shot on the spot. I'm telling you this because that was probably the first real traumatic moment in my life, because I really loved this girl, and it just gave me such a blow that to this day I've never forgotten her, and that's 60 years later, 70 years later, and I still carry that little copy of that little pendant that she gave me with me on my keychain here. So it was a miserable time in the ghetto, but it was going to be worse. And so what happened on the 28th of June, 1942, was that we were told to get ready the next day, each person with one suitcase. We would be resettled in the east. We're east toward Russia, of course. And, well, we believed that, resettling. Well, okay, so we'll be resettled. Maybe that's better than being in a ghetto. except that the Germans, the Nazis, had a way. I don't know whether you know what the word euphemism is. Euphemism is a word, is a good word, a light and easy word that hides a bad word. And so resettling really meant being deported and being sent either into a slave labor camp or into a concentration camp or into an extermination camp. We didn't know all this, okay? We thought resettling is resettling. Maybe we'll be farmers somewhere, you know, in the East. Well, so the following day then, all these people streamed out of these dance halls and other little buildings here and there, under guards, and we were taken to a junkyard of our town. And in the junkyard, there were tables, long tables set up, and there were SS people behind the tables. On the table, they had a whip and a pistol. And we had to go by and hand over all of our valuables. Well, people still had valuables. They had maybe a gold coin, or they had a gold chain, or they had an ankle bracelet, or they had a wedding ring. All that had to be handed over to them, and that was that. Now, every so often, a German policeman would come and pick one person out of this queue to check them, and they would take that person into like a barn-like building. Then we heard screaming coming out of there, and kicked out came a person. I remember that, with blood streaming all over his head, and that was really the second traumatic moment in my life. I'd never seen anything like that before. They may have found something that the person hadn't handed over, or maybe they just beat him up. I have no idea, but it was just a horrible, horrible sight. After that, we were divided up, men and women, and then the men were divided up into three groups, old, middle-aged, and young, and the women were again divided up, middle-aged, young, middle-aged, and old. Same thing. Now, I remember being, of course, sent to the young people's group, and my mom running after me and just crying, saying, "Walter, Walter, do not leave us." And the SS man walking up to her with his whip and hitting her over the shoulder and just driving her back into the women's group. And I was alone in a group with a bunch of young people. Young people, some older, some younger, okay, than I. And then we waited, basically, until trains came, and we were loaded on the trains, and there was weeping on the train. I'd never been separated from my parents before. That was the first time. Scared to death, of course. We didn't know where we were headed, and the train took off, destination unknown, and I was there with all those kids. So this is basically where the story about the camps begin. Because we were on the train for, we had no watches, no anything like that. No idea how long, but I estimated maybe an hour, 45 minutes, hour and a half, something like that, until the train stopped. And we were, well, these were still passenger trains, okay? So we had seats, but this was to change. The next transportation that I'll tell you about happened in cattle trains with those sliding doors on each side, totally enclosed. So there we got off the trains. We were pushed out to older people getting off the train would fall out. We would jump over them or on them. I mean, the Germans, those guards, those people from whom I would see them every day from then on for 3 years, had no compassion, absolutely no compassion. They just laughed. When people would fall down and somebody else jumped on them because there was no other way to get out of the train, they just laughed their heads off. That was funny. And they had dogs that were snapping at us and barking. what I'm trying to tell you is that they were excellent at sort of making every action a chaotic action. Everything is chaotic. You know, when you try to save yourself from being beaten up, you don't care who's next to you. You use your elbows. You try to get away from all this. And if you hurt other people, well, you hurt other people. And that's a very bad thing, obviously. So that followed us every time we were transferred from one camp to the other. The first camp that we marched into was a camp by the name of Sakrau, S-A-K-R-A-U. And the names that I'll give you are all German names, because when the Germans occupied Poland, and this was in occupied Poland, they renamed all the towns, okay? So Warszawa, the capital of Poland, became Warsaw, you know. So it's a sort of Germanization of the Polish name. Okay, so the first one was Sakrau. We come in, we are counted, we have to give our names, and there's a scribe who writes this on a piece of paper, and then we are driven or pushed, not driven this way, just driven by people, to the wash barrack. And at the wash barrack, our hair was all taken off, yep. And into the middle of our head, these prisoners did that. They shaved in about a 1-inch wide line or whatever, going from front to back. So everything was clipped to about, say, 1/8 of an inch, and then the line in the middle was shaved. Why? So that we would be identified. If somebody tried to flee, well, the people would know immediately, hey, this is where you're coming from. You're coming from a slave labor camp. Then that happened in the wash barrack, okay? Then we had to take off all of our clothes, of course, naked, standing there. I'd never been naked in front of other people. That in itself was quite a difficulty for many of us little kids. And we were showered, and then clothes on. We were assigned a barrack, bunk beds, straw to lie on. And then the next morning, of course, there was a workplace to go to march to, and to work, 10 to 12 hours. Now, let me tell you something about food. You know, I cannot tell you what happened in every one of those 7 camps. That's impossible. But I want to give you sort of a cross-section. The real misery really began in the second camp, 2nd, 3rd to 7th. But basically, in the evening, you would get 1 piece of bread. These were round breads, about that big, the size of a 12-inch pizza or something like that. And then a prisoner who would carry these breads to the barracks where we lived would cut the bread. As we marched by, they would cut, just like a pizza again, these little sectors out of that bread. So we found out after the war that we were supposed to have gotten between 10 and 12 inches of 12 ounces of bread per day in the evening, okay? With it came a lukewarm black liquid called coffee. It was bitter, was lukewarm, but it was a liquid anyway. That was evening, on the average, in every camp. Now, we used to discuss. You know, people ask me, so what did you talk about in the camps? Well, I call these people that I'm going to tell you about the bread philosophers. We talked mostly about food, because we eventually became starved. We became skeletons, actually. And so what we talked about is, how do you eat that piece of bread that you got once a day? Well, you could eat the whole thing. That's what yours truly did. I got the bread, I ate it. Other people broke it in half, put it in the pocket, went to sleep. Well, there was a danger of this bread being stolen. I didn't want to take that risk. So I ate the whole piece of bread. And then some people crumbled the bread up, put it in the pocket, and they just ate sort of more or less crumbs, bigger pieces, so as long as it lasted. And well, they had the wonderful sensation of getting a little food into them. I ate mine in one piece. That was food. Eventually our clothing was taken away from us, and we ended up with what you know from television probably, or from that museum, blue-white striped stuff. What was that? We never got any underwear, never, not once, in 3 years. A pair of pants, a jacket, a shirt, a jacket, and a little hat. All the blue-white stuff, okay? But the weave of all this clothing was so loose that if I had it here and looked through it, I'd see you all. So the wind, and we worked in snow and in ice, blew right through us. So much for the clothing, okay? Wherever you worked, you could never talk with anybody else because the guards were always around you and they would smack you with their whips, truncheons really, stiff leather, and beat you up. And I mean, I was beaten up more than once, but one in a very special way that I'll tell you about. So it was absolutely miserable. Later on in the camps, we were infested with lice. And at night, before climbing into our bunk beds, we would try to clean each other from lice, because the lice dug into our flesh. And of course, if you left them in, that produces an infection, okay? So we tried to pull these lice out of each other. And if you left a little piece in there, you could still be infected. And if you were infected, I mean, here you go to a doctor, okay? And they'll give you a pill, or they'll pull something out of your hand or arm or whatever, foot. There, well, there were no hospitals per se, it just didn't exist. There were little rooms, and maybe a prisoner doctor had maybe aspirin and maybe alcohol and maybe a scalpel, and that was the equipment. And so I had that experience too once while I was in a camp. So if you got an infection, you could easily die from it because you swell up, say your foot, that happened to me once, or your hand, you can no longer work. And so what they did is they sent you to the main camp. We were in a peripheral camp in the last camp of Gross Rosen. In Gross Rosen, where they sent you with an infection, there was a wall that was about as long as from here to the middle of there. They locked you up against the wall, they machine gunned you. And that was the end of your life, that was the end. And then, of course, they incinerated you. And it came out of the chimneys as ashes and smoke. So the camps were hell, absolute hell. Let me tell you about the second camp, which, in my opinion, was the worst camp for me. I mean, the others were terrible. I'll tell you a little bit about those. It was a camp by the name of Brande, B-R-A-N-D-E, and the German head of the camp was a man by the name of Pompe, P-O-M-P-E, Kurt Pompe. You can dial this into your computer and you'll get his name and a little bit of his history. Sadistic character, absolutely horrible character. And so every morning when we had roll call before marching out to work to the construction site, he would come out and he walked through the ranks of the people that were lined up there. And he would walk up to you with his whip and just smack you over the shoulder with it, and you had to step out. You step out. So every morning there was a special group formed of, I don't know, between 10 and 14 people. And these people now, after we were dismissed, there was no construction site there. We didn't have to march out and work somewhere else. We cleaned up the barracks and we cut the grass in summertime, wintertime removed snow, etc., etc. So that group was marched off to the wash barrack. And then we heard screaming coming. We were dismissed and we were doing these small jobs. Then we heard this screaming coming from these wash barracks. And obviously I didn't know what was going on. I walked up to one of the prisoners who had been there, and asked him, well, what's going on? Why the screaming? And he looked at me, listened to me, turned around and walked away. Didn't say a word to me. That happened twice or three times. And then about 2 weeks after I had been to that particular camp, a couple was a camp policeman, a prisoner camp policeman. They walked around in black boots and they had whips too. Had two young people with him and came up to me. I was digging a hole to put some kind of something into the ground that they told me to do. He said, come with us. So he took us to the wash barrack. And what I saw is beyond description. I cannot, I have it in my head, I see the picture, but I don't have words to tell you. Because 10 or 12 corpses were lying in the wash barrack, all over the place, in filth, in excrement, in urine, in blood, and in filthy water. They were just lying there, dead. And so these two boys and I, our job was to take them, to put them on a cart, to take them into the neighboring woods, to dump them into a mass grave, shovel some earth on this, come back, and clean up the wash barrack. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. So at that point, I again asked some of the prisoners, so what's going on? I mean, how come these dead people? And he told me, he had been there for a lengthy time, he told me what was happening. This man Pompey, the German head of the camp, and some of the guards were killing those people. How? There were big, in the wash barrack, there were showers, of course, but there were also big containers, vats, with boiling water in which the prisoners would boil the underwear of the guards. And that was done in Europe. I mean, my mom also boiled the underwear of my dad and my sister and myself. So that was done in Europe, basically. Maybe it's still being done, I don't know. But the people were killed by getting cold showers and then alternately being doused with boiling water from those vats that were there. And obviously these people were trying to escape this, so the guards were chasing them around doing this and beating them up in between time until the people expired and died. This is what sadism is all about. When you enjoy other people's suffering, then you are a sadistic person. Well, I mean, I've never gotten over that because I still see these things and so often I have nightmares, and my wife wakes me up and say, "Hey, wake up," because I make noises and stuff like that. I start talking during the night. I'm not aware of it at all, but dreams, those terrible dreams. So that's camp number 2. There's actually something else that I'll tell you about that. In many ways, that was one of the best camps I was in, because when I arrived and gave my name, the head of the camp, you see, there's a head of the camp inside, a prisoner, and then the German head of the guards outside. They are in charge, of course. So the Jewish head of the camp said to me, "Oh, Walter Ziffer, you're Walter. Are you the son of the attorney from Český Těšín? I knew your father because he represented me in some kind of a litigation." And I said, "Yes, that's my father." He said, "You'll be my personal servant," he said. Well, what that amounted to basically is to make, he had a special room, a separate room, a smaller room, and I had to, very early in the morning, walk over from my barrack, make a fire in his wood stove, and polish his black boots, and clean the room, etc., stuff like that. So he told me all that, told me what my duties were. And then he opened a cupboard, and in the cupboard was some honey and some preserves and some slices of bread. There was some margarine in there. So he showed that to me. Then he kicked open a box that was under his table, and there was bread in there, pieces of bread, still in packages, addressed to people in the camp. From family that wasn't yet deported, they sent packages to the people who were deported, who were in the camps. But all this was intercepted and ended up in that box under his table. And so he said, he called me mein Kleiner, which in German means my little one. He said, "You can eat any of this bread down here in that box. That's for you and my other friends," he said. And so I did. And so that particular camp that I just described, where the people were killed, as I told you, I mean, I had enough to eat. And my friends who came with me into that camp, there were about 10 or 12 of them, all lost their lives in that camp. And I survived. It just gives you an idea of, how things worked. I mean, after I speak in groups like yours, people ask me sometimes, "How come you survived?" Well, mostly I had good luck, It was my doing, because the other kids died. This man didn't make them his personal servants. So that was Brande. So we were transferred from Brande to a place by the name of Graditz, which was a German Air Force base, and that was one of the better camps. And I'll tell you why. Again, we moved machinery in there and furniture and what have you, and the SS were not our guards. These were Air Force personnel, soldiers, who guarded us. And it was like a town, a small town. What was good about this camp? Well, let me tell you, what was good about the camp was that there were garbage cans in the street, and we had access to the garbage cans. And so as we moved the stuff through the street from this building to that building, or from the station, railroad station, to the factory type of place, they would let us go through the garbage cans. And I'm telling you the truth. Have you ever seen bread that's been around for a long time, maybe a bit moist, that grows like green stuff on it? Rotten stuff. We ate that stuff. Those were pieces of sandwiches that were just discarded by the Air Force personnel, the soldiers, thrown away. And we had access to them, and we were just super happy to be able to eat the stuff. And the absolutely amazing thing, which I do not understand to this day, I've asked my doctors about it, and they couldn't answer it. I never got sick, not once, from eating this rotten bread. Don't understand it. Never brushed our teeth. for 3 years. Had no toothbrushes, toothpaste, not a cavity. And just amazing how things work out. Nobody's been able to explain that to me. So Graditz also was a bad camp in one way, and let me tell you that. When we were given our clothing, we also were given shoes that were wooden, that had wooden soles and cloth tops, and shoelaces, of course, in the shoes. And so shoelaces don't last forever, you know. You use them in rain and snow and sunshine and whatever. And so there were raids, air raids on our camp or maybe on factories close by when American and British planes would come and bomb us. And we saw the bombs falling. And some came pretty close. But whenever the alarm, the air raid alarm came on, we had to jump into ditches and stay there. And then when the all clear came, we came out of the ditches. But once, while we were in the ditches, a person whom I did not know, but a fellow prisoner, saw a piece of wire that was lying maybe 10 feet from the ditch, and his shoelaces had gone to pot. He couldn't close his shoes anymore. And so he thought he'd take that thin piece of wire that lay there. He jumped out of the ditch during the air raid and got that piece of wire, jumped back into the ditch, and the guard saw him. As soon as the air raid was over, the guards came, picked him up. And when we arrived in camp, there was a gallows, and he was hanged for stealing a piece of wire. And the head of the German guards at that point gave us a big speech telling us this is what happens to people who steal German property. So, you know, you can put two and two together and understand what we went through. So I'm jumping around here a little bit. One of the camps was called Schmiedeberg. Have you ever heard of V1s and V2s? Anybody? One person, 1, 2, 3. Well, these were missiles that the Germans produced and were shot into England. They were not guided missiles. They were just shot into the general direction of England. And they landed there, and then some landed in London, and there were fires there, and they did a lot of damage. No question about that. So in Schmiedeberg, in that camp, Schmiedeberg was a camp that was very close to a mountain. And that mountain was completely hollowed out, and they were testing in that area the engines for these V1s and V2s. And I had a special job there. I was on a machine that bent rebars. Anybody know what rebars are? Okay, many more. Rebars are rods that are of different diameter that are put into concrete to produce steel reinforced concrete. And so we were building big buildings, you might say, thick walls where they were testing the engines for these unguided missiles that were shot into England. So I was operating a machine that bent rebars, and I had a blueprint, and I had to bend this according to the blueprint. Other prisoners brought the bars in and shoved it into the machine, and I did the rest. Well, at one point, an engineer, a German engineer, came to me, the machine, and said, "Follow me." So I followed him to his office, a little office on the construction site. And I stood in front of his desk, and he pulled out a blueprint, rolled it, unrolled it on the table, and showed it to me and said, "From now on, you're going to bend these rebars according to this blueprint." Well, you know it, the rebar had, you know, it's like that, and down and up. There's all kind of bends in it. Thick stuff, about that thick. 2 inches maybe, inch and a half. And so, you've seen blueprints, I hope, some of you. There are, you know, when you make a bend, there's a dimension given down below, so that you know how to measure the thing, where to put the bends in. So, a lot of little dimensions, simple stuff, 1 inch, 3 inches, 2 inches. I added this up, and underneath was the whole length of the bent rebar given. So I added up those little ones, and it didn't check out against the total one. I was pretty good in arithmetic. So I stand there in front of the desk, and I said, "Sir, there's a problem here because these dimensions don't check out." My native language is German, okay? That's how we spoke at home. I told this to him in German, of course. He sat behind the desk, said nothing, just shook his head like that. He was a very young person, engineer. So I stand there, I wait. He finally said, "You're not a Jew." I didn't laugh. I mean, I felt almost like laughing. I said, "Sir, I am a Jew, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm imprisoned here." Again, silence. And then he said, "No, you can't be a Jew." So I said, "Why?" I did say, "Why?" Very politely, of course, scared to death. He said, "Because Jews are not capable of speaking German." You get it? Okay? So, you see, Jews in Germany were called Untermenschen, which means underhumans, lower than humans. And people who are lower than humans just can't learn a language. Okay? This is what he let me know. Well, I mean, I didn't argue with him, obviously. But he did this. He walked up to his cupboard, opened his lunchbox, and gave me half of his sandwich. And I went back to work, of course. So I mean, when I'm telling you this because young people in Germany got an education that was full of lies. I mean, I have one instructional book, a Nazi instructional books at home, that is called Die Judenfrage, the Jewish question. And from page 1 to page 75 is nothing but lies. You should consider yourself very fortunate to be in an American school with wonderful teachers who do not tell you lies, who tell you how it is. That's why I'm telling you this particular story. Keep that in mind. Very, very important. Because that should stay with you for the rest of your lives. In America, you can get a good, true education if you apply yourself. Okay, so let me jump a bit forward here, scroll forward to my last camp. My last camp was Waldenburg, which was in Germany, not in occupied Poland. And in Waldenburg, we were drilling holes into bedrock. There was a big German company called the IG Color Industry, something big like General Motors or DuPont or something like that. And there was a huge factory there. And then there was a big terrain that was just rock. And so they would give us a rod about that thick, and we would stand opposite each other, two people, and we would stand there, and it was bitter cold. That was the last winter from 1944 to 1945. We would stand there holding the rod, both of us, and we would lift it about a foot and a half, let it drop. Pick it up, twist it a little bit, let it drop. Picked it up, etc., etc. And eventually, very slowly, a hole about that deep was dug into bedrock, and then we were evacuated, And then the German people came in, the workers, put dynamite into this thing, blow this up, okay? And the new level was exposed. They needed to lower the bedrock level to build on it. Why, I don't know, I have no idea. So it really was bitter cold. On the way to that workplace, from the camp of Waldenburg, the concentration camp, we walked through the main street of Waldenburg every day, except Sunday. And I mean, there were apartment houses on both sides. And we looked like a bunch of skeletons covered with skin. I weighed 87 pounds, age 18, when I was liberated. That I happen to know. I'll tell you how I know that, okay? So we marched through there. And we passed a church. It was early in the morning, foggy, and a person runs out from behind the church and throws a package into our ranks. And I happened to catch that package. It was still in brown paper, you know, and I rip it open, and as I begin ripping it open, there are like 3, 4, 5 hands there were trying to take this away from me. We're starved people, you know. I managed to get a small piece of bread into my mouth, and it happened like, I'm telling you, the best cake I've ever eaten in my life. That was a gift of God. Shots ring out as this person runs out, and I don't know what happened. We marched on. Well, anyway, I got this piece of bread. We went to work. We worked. We came back to camp in the evening. We get our piece of bread. And just before we climb into our bunks, we delouse ourselves. Remember I told you about the lice, right? And take off our shoes so we can sleep. And I have a problem because I see a hole in my shoe. On the outer side of my right foot, the cloth is shredded, the piece of wood, the sole is splintered. And I don't pay any attention to it. Why? Because I'm a zombie at that point. My mind doesn't work anymore. I can't put 2 and 2 together. So I climb into my bunk and I go to sleep. I'm, exhausted. And next morning, same thing. But I noticed that the rag, we didn't have socks. They just gave us a square piece of cloth to put around our feet and into the shoe. Every time I take it off, it's sticky. And I look at my foot, and there's a wound there. But I just can't think anymore. You know, when you get information, you have to process it. And when you're a zombie, you can't process it. So it's sticky. So I go like 3 days like that, keep on going to work. And my foot is swelling and taking on all kind of colors. And there was a room called a hospital in that camp with 2 Dutch doctors, people from Holland. And so I walked to them once. I knew I couldn't put my shoe on anymore. I'd be in trouble. And they looked at my foot and they said, "Oh my gosh, you have gangrene setting in." Gangrene is something very, very bad. Sometimes they have to amputate a finger or a toe or a foot if you get gangrene. So what they did is they cleaned up my wound, because when these shots rang out, how that happened, I have no idea. One of the bullets hit at my foot. Maybe ricocheted, I have no idea. Anyway, they cleaned up my wound with a scalpel. They poured alcohol over it. I went clear to the ceiling almost. You can imagine an open wound, alcohol. And then they hid me in that little hospital. There were bunk beds there, and on the lower bunk, they put the sheets, the covers, in such a way that they hung on 4 sides, clear to the floor, and I was lying on the floor. And they hid me there. How they handled the count of the people during the roll call, I do not know. They did it somehow. So here I was. And I remember one thing from that time. Somebody at one point lifted this bed cover and put in a bowl with soup for me to eat. And I peeked out, and I saw at a distance from about here to this sleeping lady here, I saw a foot with 5 black toes, and a hand with a pair of clippers, and I'm not exaggerating, clipping off those 5 toes. I mean, just disgusting. But it didn't do a thing to me. I pulled in the soup and I had the soup. That was the important thing for me. Just to show you how a mind totally deteriorates. So anyway, they hid me. After a few days, I went back and started working. And I want to tell you about my liberation now. So that was in Waldenburg, that same camp. Walked in the morning, roll call, we stand there, and I look at the guard towers, about 300, 400 feet, the wood towers, the machine gun up there, and usually an SS soldier up there, and a big reflector that lit up the camp at night. So I look up there, and there's nobody up there. There's a machine gun there and the light, but no person. But again, zombie. I couldn't, what does that mean? So I just stand there, okay? So we stand there, wait, and then the German SS commander comes in, and he says something to the commander of the camp, the prisoner commander, walks out. There were 3 gates that opened, the 3 fences, and he takes a big key ring from his belt, and he throws it back into the camp. No idea what that means. And so we stand there. And then we hear an engine sound come closer and closer. And lo and behold, from one corner of the fence comes a tank. And it was a Russian, a Soviet tank. Had a 5-pointed star on it. There was a soldier in the turret. A single tank. And that tank drives into the fence, smashes the fence, and keeps on going. Simple as that. And we still stand there. We don't know what's going on. And so, maybe another half hour, the guy next to me says, "I think it's over," he said to me. "Let's go and organize some food." Organize is a special camp word for get some food. So we go down into Waldenburg, into the main street where we always marched through every morning. And there's a truck parked there, military truck. We climb on the truck, and there are shelves in the truck with cans in there that are camouflage painted. And my friend, I mean this guy, takes a screwdriver or something pointed, punches holes into the can. We pry open the lid, and it's white grease. But it smells good. And it's pork grease. And so we stuff this into our mouths, and then underneath are chunks of pork. We never had meat, in years. So we take this and stuff that into our mouth, open can after can after can. And then he spotted some sacks in the bed of the truck, slits them open, sugar, granulated sugar, spills out. We get on our fours, and we shove sugar into our mouth. And then everything went blank. I have no idea what happened. Then I woke up. I was in a bed between 2 sheets, white sheets, in a little room. There was a cuckoo clock across from me on the wall. Those things I remember. And I had no idea where I was. And I lie there with my eyes open, and suddenly the door opens, and a tiny little woman, maybe 4.5 feet tall, comes. She sees me there. She sits down on my bed, and she says to me, Jetzt ist alles vorüber. Wir haben den Krieg verloren, sie sind frei. It's all over now. We've lost the war. You are free. Wow. I just sank back into bed and fell asleep again. You know, we're just, I mean, just really subhumans at that point. And then I woke up a second time, I don't know how many hours later, and I saw this other guy lying also there in bed. So, to make a long story short, we stayed with the lady for 3 or 4 days. We went into town. It was abandoned, the town. We went into the basements. There were suitcases there from the Germans who had left, scared. We opened the suitcases. We got rid of our rags. I mean, we went in blue-white clothing, but rags. And we got us some decent clothing. And then we had to make a decision. And you know, if you don't make any decisions for years, you don't know how to make decisions. So the best we could do is go back to camp. And everybody was still there, and there were little fires here and there. They were roasting something, maybe a rabbit or something, or a bird. And just sitting there, not knowing what to do. And then women started coming to camp in their blue-white dresses from another concentration camp. I was very shy, and there were 3 women standing by that broken fence. And I walked up to them and said, "Excuse me, ladies, but by any chance, since you're coming from a concentration camp, or many, or several of them, did you ever run into a woman by the name of Ziffer?" And one of the women said to me, "Well, of course. There was a Ziffer woman in our barrack. There were 2 of them." Wow. And so I found out that the camp where they were from was a camp by the name of Langenbilau, a women's concentration camp. Where is it? Oh, about 30 kilometers from here. So I made my first decision, real decision. I went all by myself back to Waldenburg, to the main street, and here comes a German on a bicycle. I got in front of him and I said, "Get off the bike." He didn't argue. He got off the bike. We looked like apparitions from hell. We looked horrible. Oh, we're coming out of a hell. And so he got off, I got on the bike, and I pedaled and got to Langenbilau. I got to Langenbilau. I asked, "Where do the Ziffer women live? What barrack?" "Oh, over there." I went over there, and the women welcomed me. They had pretty good food. They fed me, but my mom wasn't there. My sister wasn't there. 2 Ziffer women. So I said, "Why don't you just sit down and wait? They'll be here." So I sat down, and about half the distance from here to there, and I waited. The door opened, and in comes my mom, in comes my sister, in comes my cousin. They all looked terrible, but I recognized them. They saw me sitting there. They looked at me, smiled at me. You know, just such a sweet smile, like somebody gives you a card when you go to the grocery store. I had my card. And so I smiled back, and they walked right by me, walked into the corner of the room, to their bunk beds, and started unloading the things, the food they had organized, you know, that they had gotten from somewhere. And I walked over to them, and I introduced myself to my mom. Yeah, I'm not kidding you. And of course, I can't describe to you the celebration, the joy, you know, that we're together. Mom, daughter, my sister, and I, and my cousin. And so we stayed there for, I don't know, maybe 3-4 days. A couple of men that joined us who were from the same area originally where we're from. And then we started a long trek home, very difficult. All the bridges were bombed out, and but we made it home. And there are some interesting stories that follow that, but I won't skip them because it's 1:45. And I will stop here, and maybe you have some questions which I'll try to respond to. Okay? I may need some help with that. You know, I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so if you ask that question, please project, okay?
Where was your dad?
Okay, well, that was the next thing I was really coming to. When we marched into our town, very victoriously so, a woman came up to us and recognized my mom and said, "Oh, Mrs. Ziffer, so you have come back." She said it very sadly, okay? And my mom said, "Yes, we're back. We're going to live here again." She was a very courageous woman. If I have time, I'll tell you why she was sad. Then a second woman came up and said, "Oh, Mrs. Ziffer, so you're back. Wonderful. Your husband is already in town." And so I was dispatched to get my to get my father. And my father was at the apartment of the maid that I mentioned right at the beginning when I spoke, that had saved some things for us. And I walked in, Malchi Kuyanova. She was happy to see me. And she said, "Yes, your dad is here." I walked into the room, and my dad sat in a chair looking into the corner of the wall. My father was really a ruined person. He had been in Auschwitz for 2 years, and he never wanted to talk about this. I know a few episodes from his life there, but very little really. He just couldn't get himself to talk about this. And so I took my father then, we rejoined the rest of the family, and he slowly came back to, to a fairly normal state. But he couldn't work no longer as an attorney. I mean, his life sort of, his good life was gone for good. And my relationship, which was just fantastic with my dad, had also come to an end because, well, I wanted to get out of there, and I did eventually, of course, came to America. But our closeness was somehow destroyed by those 3 years of concentration camps. Any other questions? Yes.
Did any of your friends survive?
Any what?
Your friends?
Any of your friends that survived?
One friend survived. His name was Peter Berger, and he emigrated after the war to Israel and lived on a kibbutz, which is one of those farms there, and I was the other one. Out of 16 people, young people, and I am one of the 16, so 15 others, just the two of us survived. It gives you an idea of what happened, the catastrophe. Their parents, none of the parents survived. All the people from my town, just short of 1,000 Jewish people, were deported directly to Auschwitz, and within 24 hours were dead. Yes?
I've got some romantics back here that want to know how you met your current wife.
How did you meet your wife?
Your current wife.
How did I meet her? That's my second wife. Okay?
I think she's just coming in.
Okay. That's my second wife. And how shall I say this? If I had not married, I wouldn't have talked to 40,000 people like this to this moment. She has been my life. Okay? That's all I can say. And I make the decision to go here or there when I'm invited, but she makes it happen. I mean, our computer is filled with letters. I mean, you know that, don't you? She does all the preparation work. But I mean, as a wife, numero uno. Eternally grateful. I would like to tell you how we met. This has something to do with a Jewish holiday. Yom Kippur in Judaism is a day of forgiveness, okay? And so you fast during that day. And so she was married at the time, and I was married. And we were invited by a third couple for the dinner to break the fast, okay? After Yom Kippur. And so I saw her with her husband. I didn't know that their marriage was on the rocks. And my marriage was on the rocks too, unfortunately. Both she and I are in contact with my former wife. We like each other, we're friends. In fact, my former wife, when asked about being friends with us, she said, I like Gail, and Gail is her name, and I like Walter, but I like Gail better. So you catch on, I see. So we met there, and we divorced eventually, and just got together. I was in Maine at the time, teaching at the University of Maine. Any other questions? Anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah.
Have you read the book The Boy in the Striped Pajamas?
Have you read the book The Boy in the Striped Pajamas?
I have not. I'm sorry. I tell you, after a while, there are literally not hundreds but thousands of books that deal with the Holocaust. And I just can't do this anymore. I just can't read this anymore. Because the final point of all these books are, I mean, it's like in music, a theme and variations. The theme is always is death. You know, whatever camp you were in, the end point was always death. There's no question about it. The variation was how they dealt out the death. How did you die? Did you die from starvation? Did you die from being beaten up? Did you die from exhaustion? Did you die by being gassed and going out through the chimney? You know, these were variations. They wanted us dead. And let me tell you something else. I owe my life to a Soviet soldier, to that tank that drove into the fence and liberated us. And that's true for all survivors. At one point or another, they were saved by the Americans or British or Russian armies in one way or another. The sad thing is that the British and the Americans who liberated the camps were kind people. And they shared their rations. They had food that they gave to the prisoners whom they liberated. Very often, though, it was that food that killed the people, because the body could no longer tolerate, say, chocolate bars, you know. So the Russians didn't do that. The Russians were absolutely cruel. Most of the people that liberated us were from Mongolia. I have never been to Mongolia, I don't know much about it. But in many cases, these soldiers raped the very women that were prisoners. And when we trekked back to our home, we avoided, totally walking in daytime because of that, because there were women in our group. And so we stayed with peasants who were very kind to us, usually put us in their barns and gave us milk and bread and other stuff. And sometimes gave us a ride with the animals in carts. It wasn't very far, but you know, we didn't have cars or trucks or anything like that. The bridges were out. And so we avoided going in daytime because of these assaults on women that were unfortunately witnessed by some of us. Yes?
What made you decide to come to America?
Well, first of all, I wanted to leave Europe. I've had it, you know. I had lost so many years in terms of education. Now that should say something to you too, you who are in school here. An uncle of mine and his wife had left Europe a day or two before World War II broke out. And they came to, he was a chemical engineer, and he came to Nashville, Tennessee, and established himself and ran a refinery there, gasoline refinery, a small outfit, but he was the technical manager. And so when I realized I wanted to get out. Right after returning home, I was actually working as an apprentice auto mechanic. And then I went to Paris, France, with a passport that wasn't quite legal, but my father got it for me, and I got across the border. So I was in Paris for almost 2 years, both as an auto mechanic and as a driver for someone who worked for UNESCO, United Nations. And my uncle from America also helped me to come over here. And so he succeeded in getting me here into a school that was approved for foreign students. It was Hume Fogg Technical and Vocational High School in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I was able to come here as an exchange student. I was supposed to return to Czechoslovakia after studying in high school here. Well, it so happened that while I was in Nashville, my uncle had a friend who knew a senator, Senator Kefauver of Tennessee. And somehow it was arranged that I meet Senator Estes Kefauver, and he liked me, and he introduced a special bill into the Senate, into Congress. I have a copy of the bill. I really guard this because it's so important, such a historical moment for me. And that bill, of course, was approved to make me from a student immigrant a regular immigrant. And I was then naturalized and became an American citizen 4 or 5 years later. I think it's 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. But I wanted to go to school. And I went to, I came to Nashville, and I finished high school in 1 year. I've had only 4, just regular schools, okay, 4 grades of schools. But then I finished high school in 1 year and was enrolled at Vanderbilt University and studied engineering, mechanical engineering. I finished that in 4 years, and then worked for General Motors for 7 years in Dayton, Ohio. Got 5 US patents, mind you, proud of that. And then I thought, well, I don't want to work with cars and engines and bodies. I worked with Fisher Body, if you remember, one of the divisions there. I want to do something with people, and so I went to a graduate school at Oberlin College and got 2 master's degree there in theology and biblical studies. And then I went overseas and I taught in France, and I taught in Belgium, and I taught in Washington, D.C. And while I was in France, I worked and earned a PhD in theology at a university there. And so I'm telling you, coming to this country was coming to paradise. I kept on writing my family back and forth every week. I got a letter from them, I wrote them a letter, and they were concerned. Then my father died. I still saw him a year before he died. I went back with 4 children and my former wife to Czechoslovakia. I wanted to introduce my family to my parents. My father then died a year later. And then after that, I saw my mom, I'm not sure, 2 or 3 times, once in Belgium, never in this country. They just, it's too far, But I saw them. But my sister remained with my parents, and she married, and she was very loyal to the parents. I just wanted education and freedom, and so I got out. Any other questions?
Ranger.
Can we see the pendant that the girl gave you?
Do you have the pendant that you got from the soldier?
No, from Lady Girl.
Girl.
Yeah, I have this. Yeah, I have it in my pocket, of course. Well, so what happened is, I have lectured on several occasions at a place for teachers here in North Carolina. And I told the same story to a bunch of students, to teachers there, I take it back, not to students. And this teacher remembered this story, and years later, when I was there again, NCAT, that place is NCAT, she was there, and she said, Walter, I have something for you. So what was it? So she went to a flea market somewhere during those 4 years that I didn't see her. And she found a very cheap replica, because what Lydia had given to me was gold with black letters. And the part that you twist, I don't know if you can see it, it's sort of hard to see from where you are. See, it's a little disc that turns. Had on one side every other letter of the sentence, I love you. So when you twirled it, well, the whole thing comes up, and it said, I love you, okay? So I'm carrying this with you, and I still love her. She was just a wonderful little girl. Yeah, see? Can you, I don't know, you probably can't see it from behind there, but just twists. But afterwards, if you want to come and see it, I'll show it to you nearby. Any other questions?
Do you have any children?
Yes, I have 4 children. I'm married and have children. I have 4 children, 10 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren, and 1 on the way, 1 great-grand on the way. And they are in New York, and they are in Florida, in Gainesville, Florida, and they are in, see, where's Rebecca? In New Jersey, thank you. And some here in Horseshoe, not far from Asheville. My son lives in that area, and also one of my daughters, he's a social worker, and my daughter Ruth, is a nurse who works with Mission Hospital. So I have two children close by. Over there, somebody.
Have you written a book?
Have you ever written a book?
Yeah, I have the books here. If you have $20, you can buy one. No, it's $12 for students. Take it back. $12 for students, faculty, $20. And the book's in the car. So if anybody wants a book, we'll go to the car and we'll get them. And I'll sign them for you too. And it's called, what? Confronting the Silence, a Holocaust Survivor's Search for God. And there you'll find some of the stories that I've told you, but much more detail, of course, and much more material following my liberation, of course, and coming to America and so forth and so on. And that came out on March 5th, this past March 5th, which happened to me, my 90th birthday. And my congregation had a big shindig, and really it was a wonderful celebration. I'm very proud of it. Anybody else? There's somebody over there.
How long have you and your current wife been married?
She counts it differently from me because we were together for a few years before we married, but I think it's 26 years, isn't it? Something. I was married to my former wife 38 years. So any other intimate questions? Everybody happy? I guess so. No more questions? Thank you very much. I hope you have learned something. I hope you remember some of this. And I hope you are vigilant about the times that we are in and the times that you will be in. Because, you know, these miserable things that happened to me, did not happen overnight, and I began my talk that way. There's always a development before the shoe drops, you know? And so what I want you to do is to think analytically and critically when you read the newspaper, when you watch television, and use your common sense to make a judgment as to whether the things that you see make sense or not. Because there's a lot of lying, unfortunately, going on in our country this way, in high places. And you know, with the media that we have, with computers, you can take you, young woman, glasses, and with computer skills, somebody can put my head on your body. You know that? That can be done. Yeah, and that's manipulation, and that is lying, you know? And a lot of it is going on like this in our own time. And you have to be very careful when you watch the news, when you read the news, when you discuss things, discuss it with other people, ask your teachers, does that make sense or doesn't it make sense? That's critical thinking. And you need this as you go into high school and as you go into college or university or graduate school, and I hope you all will, although it's not a must. I sometimes think I'd be better off being a plumber or a farmer. The income is better than people who have PhDs, you know, really, and it's just as important. So, but critical thinking is just important for your life, in whatever area of employment you'll work. So don't just accept blindly what you read and what you hear, but think about it and discuss it with whoever you think is capable of discussing it. Okay? Can you promise this to me? Say yes. Yes. Good. Thank you. Okay.